At the end of the 20th century, it really felt like liberal democracy had won. It was the undisputed champ, the final answer. But as we get deeper and deeper into this new century, that story is getting a whole lot more complicated. So what's next? Is democracy still the champion? Is it facing a brand new challenger? Or could it become a casualty of our time?
Okay, so here's how we're going to break this all down. First, we're going to go back to that moment of peak optimism. Then we'll dig into why that faith is kind of cracking today. We'll look at the new playbook for taking democracies apart, meet a powerful new contender in the ring, and finally we'll ask that huge question: who actually wins this century?
All right, so let's rewind. Picture it, the late 1980s. The Berlin Wall is about to come down, and there's this incredible feeling in the air. A feeling of total victory for one specific political idea.
And this, right here, was the big idea, put into words so famously by Francis Fukuyama. And this wasn't just some academic theory, It really felt like the logical end to the huge ideological battles of the 20th century. It felt like liberal democracy had just plain won. And this feeling was backed up by some incredible facts on the ground. I mean, just look at this growth. This explosion was so big that political scientist Samuel Huntington actually called it the third wave. All over the world, from Southern Europe to Latin America, countries were embracing democracy. It honestly seemed unstoppable.
But here's where the plot takes a major turn. This chart, wow, it shows a huge generational gap. If you look at places like the UK and the USA, you see that younger generations, people born in the 80s, are way less likely than their parents or grandparents to say that living in a democracy is, essential. That bedrock commitment, it's fading. And that brings us to what a lot of experts are now calling democratic deconsolidation. The whole idea that democracy was the only game in town, well, that's not such a sure thing anymore.
So what does this big term actually mean? Well, it's not just about being unhappy with the current batch of politicians. No, this goes way deeper. It's a fundamental shift where people start to lose faith in the system itself, and they start to think about alternatives that used to be totally unthinkable.
And this isn't just a feeling, it's a trend you can actually measure. And honestly, this statistic is pretty shocking. Just a couple of decades back, in 1995, only about 1 in 16 Americans thought army rule could be a good thing. Look at that number today. It's jumped to 1 in 6. That is a massive shift in a core democratic belief.
And what's really striking here is that the United States isn't just tagging along on some global trend. Among a lot of well-established democracies, is actually leading the charge. This chart shows how fast support for army rule is growing each year, and you can see the US right there at the top with the sharpest increase.
So all this growing dissatisfaction, this deconsolidation, it really sets the stage for what comes next. Because when people lose faith, it creates an opening. So how are democracies actually falling apart today? Well, forget what you've seen in old movies. It's not about military coups anymore. The threat now is way, way more subtle. This old fable, which was highlighted in the book How Democracies Die, is just the perfect metaphor. You've got a frustrated population, the horse, who turns to a strong man leader, the hunter, to help them beat their rivals. The leader says, "Sure, I'll help." But once they have that power, they refuse to let go, and suddenly, the democracy finds itself completely trapped. And this happens through a pretty clear, repeatable playbook. It's like death by 1,000 cuts. Elected leaders don't just get rid of democracy overnight, no. They use the tools of democracy to slowly take it apart from the inside. They go after the courts, the media, the actual rules of elections, until the whole game is permanently rigged in their favor.
But the threat isn't just coming from the inside. There's a powerful new model for how to run a country that's emerging, one that combines authoritarianism with the latest technology, and it's all built on data.
And this raises a really fundamental question for our century. We used to think the internet would be this great force for liberation and freedom, right? But what if it's actually building the road to a more efficient and way more controlling form of government? The engine behind this new model has a name: surveillance capitalism. Basically, it's a system built to vacuum up our personal data, everything from what we browse online to where we go, to predict and ultimately to control what we do next. And a tool that started in the private sector to sell us stuff is now being perfected as a tool for running a state.
And you can see a real-world example of this model taking form right now. Through things like the digital Silk Road, China is exporting the actual infrastructure for this new kind of government all over the world. It's a system that offers a really powerful deal. Incredible efficiency, from smart highways to making daily life easier, all thanks to AI and massive data collection. The price? Your data and a bit of control.
Okay, so let's pull all these threads together. We've seen democracy's confident past, its very anxious present, and a seriously powerful new challenger built on technology. So, where does that leave us?
That big ideological battle we all thought was over and done with in 1989, well, it's back, but the players have changed. On one side, you have a struggling liberal democracy, fighting a serious crisis of faith from its own people. And on the other, a rising digital authoritarianism that offers a trade. Give us your data, and we'll give you stability and convenience.
And that, ultimately, is the question that's going to define this century. For hundreds of years, the foundation of legitimate power has been the consent of the governed, the people's permission. But are we entering a totally new era? An era where power comes not from consent, but from control over data? The answer to that is going to shape the future of freedom for a long, long time.